Most of us grew up watching them. A ragtag group of kids, some dirt poor, some just mischievous,
Look at yourself. Look what he did. And look at your nose.
running around backlots, getting into trouble, and somehow making it feel like the most joyful thing in the world. But when the cameras stopped rolling and the years moved on, the lives of many of those children took turns that nobody expected. And today, we're going to walk through how each Little Rascals cast member died. Part 1. The world they came from. Before we talk about how they left, it's worth spending a moment on what they built together. Our gang, created by producer Hal Roach, began as a series of silent short films in 1922. The idea was simple and radical at the same time. Real children, behaving like real children. No theatrical polish, no exaggerated adult acting styles. Just kids being kids on screen, with all the mess and energy and honesty that came with it. By the time the series converted to sound in 1929, it had already found a massive audience. And through the 1930s, under Hal Roach's roof on Washington Boulevard in Culver City, California, the show became something that a generation of Americans would carry with them for the rest of their lives. Spanky, Alfalfa, Buckwheat, Darla, Stymie, Porky, Froggy, Wheezer, Chubby, names that still ring a bell for anyone who grew up watching black and white television on a Saturday morning. In 1938, MGM purchased the rights to the series from Roach, and production continued under the studio until 1944. When the shorts were repackaged and syndicated for television in the 1950s, they were rechristened The Little Rascals, and a whole new generation discovered them. What made the series remarkable, aside from the laughter it produced, was what it quietly represented. In an era of rigid racial segregation in American public life, our gang put black and white children on screen as equals, playing together, arguing together, scheming together. It wasn't a statement. It was just the way the films were made. And for millions of children who grew up watching them, that casual equality was simply part of what the world looked like on Saturday mornings. What most viewers never knew was what those children were walking into once the spotlights dimmed. For some of them, life after our gang was simply ordinary. They grew up, found their way, and lived to old age. But for many of the most beloved faces in the series, the decades that followed were marked by struggles that the screen never showed. This is their story. Norman Chubby Cheney, 1918 to 1936. Norman Cheney was the first of the major Rascals to die. He was also the only one whose death came while the series was still in production. Norman was born on October 18, 1918 in Cambridge, Maryland. He didn't come from a show business family. He didn't have an agent, a headshot, or a stage mother. He won a nationwide talent contest that Hal Roach's studio had organized to find an overweight child to join the cast. When they found Norman, he was 3 feet 11 inches tall and weighed 113 pounds. That was enough. He was signed almost immediately. On screen, Norman played Chubby, a high-spirited, affectionate kid who became a fan favorite almost at once. Between 1929 and 1931, he appeared in 32 shorts, but as quickly as he had arrived, his time was cut short. Norman had a glandular condition that caused him to continue gaining weight in ways that couldn't be managed with diet alone. His weight climbed past 300 pounds. The studio chose not to renew his contract, and the family moved back to Maryland. What followed for Norman was genuinely sad. Over the next several years, he worked to bring his weight down, and by 1936, he had managed to get it under control enough to undergo surgery. But the surgery, related to his ongoing glandular condition, went wrong. Norman Cheney died on May 29, 1936, at the age of 21. He was buried in an unmarked grave in Baltimore. It wasn't until 2012, more than 75 years later, that a local group raised the funds to finally place a plaque on his resting place. He was the first of the gang to go. He was 21 years old. Bobby Wheezer Hutchins, 1925 to 1945. Bobby Hutchins came to the series young, just 2 years old when Hal Roach signed him on a 5-year contract after spotting the toddler's natural charm. His nickname came from his habit of running around the studio lot until he was completely winded and wheezing. It stuck, and so did he. Bobby appeared in 58 Our Gang shorts between 1927 and 1933, making him one of the longest-running members in the history of the series. When his time on the show ended, Bobby went home to Tacoma, Washington. He lived a quiet, ordinary adolescence. Went to high school, worked at a gas station for a while. By all accounts, he had adjusted to normal life with more grace than many of his former co-stars would manage. In the early 1940s, Bobby enlisted in the United States Army Air Forces. He was training to become a pilot at the Merced Army Airfield in California, and by all accounts, he was doing well. 1 week before he was scheduled to graduate from the Aviation Cadet Program on May 17, 1945, his plane collided in midair with another aircraft during a routine training exercise. Bobby Hutchins was killed. He was 19 years old. The other pilot survived and managed to land safely. He died a young man who had spent his childhood making people laugh, doing something that felt, in its own way, exactly like the mischievous, headlong spirit that made Wheezer unforgettable. Norman Chubby Cheney and Bobby Wheezer Hutchins are where the hard losses begin, but they were not the last. Carl Alfalfa Switzer, 1927 to 1959. Carl Switzer may be the most famous of all the Rascals, and his death is certainly the most written about. It's also, depending on who you ask, one of the most disputed. Carl was born on August 7, 1927 in Paris, Illinois. In 1934, his family took a trip to California to visit relatives. During a tour of the Hal Roach studios, 6-year-old Carl and his 8-year-old brother Harold wandered into the studios open to the public cafeteria and began performing for the diners, singing, clowning, doing what they apparently did wherever they went. Hal Roach himself was in the room, watched the boys, and signed them both on the spot. Harold became Slim, or Deadpan. Carl became Alfalfa. The character Carl created was something special. A freckled, cow-licked kid with an unfounded belief in his own singing voice. A hopeless romantic where Darla Hood was concerned. And a best friend to Spanky McFarland. By 1937, Alfalfa had surpassed Spanky as the most popular character in the series. Carl appeared in 61 Our Gang shorts from 1935 to 1940, when he aged out of the role at 12. After Our Gang, Carl kept working. He appeared in minor roles in some genuinely significant films. It's a Wonderful Life in 1946, where he's in the famous dance scene. The Defiant Ones in 1958. The 10 Commandments in 1956, playing an uncredited slave. But the central roles never came, and the steady work dried up. He told an interviewer in 1953, "Don't get me wrong, I didn't quit Hollywood. I'm a guy who likes to eat, and I found I couldn't do it without working. I would have stayed in Hollywood if I could have gotten picture jobs." And because he couldn't, he adapted. In his later years, Carl turned to other things. He became a bear hunting guide with a genuine clientele that included names like Roy Rogers and Jimmy Stewart. He trained dogs. He tended bar at a place called Wolf's Den in Studio City. He had 2 marriages, 2 divorces, and a son. In January 1958, a year before his death, he was shot and wounded by an unknown assailant in a separate incident that was never solved. Then came January 21, 1959. Carl had been keeping a hunting dog that belonged to his acquaintance, Moses Samuel Stilts. The dog ran away. Carl spent $50 tracking it down and recovering it. $35 on a newspaper reward ad, $15 in drinks at the bar when someone brought the animal back. Carl wanted Stilts to cover that $50. Stilts didn't agree that he owed anything. That night, Carl and a friend drove to the San Fernando Valley home where Stilts was staying. What happened next was disputed then and is still disputed today. There was a struggle. A clock was broken over someone's head. A .38 caliber revolver came out. Stilts fired. Carl Switzer was shot in the abdomen and died before reaching the hospital. He was 31 years old. A coroner's jury ruled the shooting justifiable homicide, and Stilts was never charged. A witness who came forward decades later claimed the story was different than what was told to the jury. What is certain is that Carl died the same night as Cecil B. DeMille, and DeMille's obituary dominated every newspaper. Alfalfa barely got a mention. He was buried at Hollywood Forever Cemetery. His tombstone bears a small drawing of a dog. Darla Hood, 1931 to 1979. Darla Hood was born on November 4, 1931, in Leedy, Oklahoma. She was 3 years old when her mother took her to New York to study singing and dancing. Joe Rivkin, a casting director for Hal Roach Studios, discovered her there and brought her to Hollywood. At 4 years old, she made her first appearance in Our Gang Follies of 1936. She stayed with the series until 1941. On screen, Darla was the sweetheart, the object of Alfalfa's dramatic, off-key affections, coquettish and charming charming, older than her years in the way that very young performers often seem. She appeared in 42 shorts over 6 years and became one of the most genuinely beloved faces in the whole franchise. After Our Gang, Darla had a real career. She graduated from Fairfax High School in Los Angeles as an honor student. She formed a vocal group called the Enchanters. She sang on the radio, appeared in films into the late 1950s, and did voiceover work for television commercials, including the memorable voice of the Chicken of the Sea mermaid. She was one of the few former Rascals who made a genuinely smooth transition to adult life in show business. In 1979, Darla was busy organizing a Little Rascals reunion for the Sons of the Desert, a Laurel and Hardy appreciation society. In the middle of that work, she went into a hospital in North Hollywood for what was expected to be routine surgery, an appendectomy. The procedure itself went fine, but somewhere during the process, she received a blood transfusion that was contaminated with hepatitis. Her heart gave out. Darla Hood died on June 13, 1979. She was 47 years old. She was one of the great ones, and her death, caused not by any of the troubles that followed so many of her co-stars, but by a contaminated transfusion during routine surgery, carried a particularly cruel randomness to it. Matthew Stymie Beard, 1925 to 1981. Of all the Rascals, Matthew Beard, Stymie, may have had the most complete arc, the darkest fall, and the most genuine redemption. Matthew was born on January 1st, 1925, in Los Angeles. His father was a minister. He was one of 14 children. In 1930, when he was 5 years old, his parents brought him to an open call at Hal Roach Studios, where Roach was looking for a young black actor to replace Alan Farina Hoskins, who had aged out. Out of what is said to have been around 350 children auditioning, Matthew walked to center stage, looked around, and smiled. Director Robert McGowan hired him on the spot, no screen test needed. The character that McGowan named Stymie, because young Matthew kept wandering off during filming and stymieing production, became one of the most beloved in the series, always in an oversized derby hat, a gift from Stan Laurel himself, who admired the boy's talent. Stymie was self-assured, sly, and genuinely funny. He appeared in 36 shorts from 1930 to 1935. His family's income depended heavily on his earnings. After leaving the series at 10, Matthew tried to keep acting, but parts dried up. By the time he was a teenager, the world he had known was gone. He grew up in East Los Angeles, in an environment where drugs and crime were readily available. By his mid-teens, he had begun using marijuana. By his early 20s, he was addicted to heroin. He was arrested at 18 for theft to fund his habit, and spent most of the next 2 decades cycling in and out of jail, broke and without direction. Then, in 1966, Matthew walked into Synanon, a California drug rehabilitation community, as by his own account, a very sick man. He stayed for 7 years. He came out clean, and he stayed clean. He was open about what had happened to him. He talked about it publicly, in the spirit of his father the minister, as a cautionary story that he was willing to share if it kept someone else from going down the same road. He spoke to audiences about addiction. He reconnected with his old castmates. He ran into George Spanky McFarland at a reunion in the mid-1970s, reportedly the first time the two had seen each other in more than 35 years. That friendship, which had been so genuine on screen all those decades ago, picked right back up. In the 1970s, he came back to acting. He made guest appearances on Sanford and Son, The Jeffersons, Maude, and Good Times, where he had a recurring role as a character named Monty. In 1978, he appeared in the Buddy Holly story, wearing the old derby hat, working a backstage scene at the Apollo Theater. He traveled the country giving talks about drug addiction. He seemed, at last, to have found his footing. Then, on January 3rd, 1981, 2 days after his 56th birthday, Matthew suffered a stroke. He fell down a flight of stairs in the motel where he was living. He lay there for 2 days before anyone found him. He was rushed to Los Angeles County USC Medical Center, where he died of pneumonia on January 8th, 1981. He was buried in his derby hat, the hat that Stan Laurel had given him 50 years earlier on the set of a comedy short in Culver City, because Laurel had simply wanted a boy he admired to have something to remember him by. Billy Buckwheat Thomas, 1931 to 1980. Billy Thomas was born on March 12, 1931, in Los Angeles. He first appeared in Our Gang in 1934, initially dressed in the costume that had been worn by a girl who preceded him in a similar role. Over time, Buckwheat became his own character. Wide-eyed, good-natured, the youngest of the core group, with a distinctive speech pattern that became instantly recognizable. He appeared in 93 shorts from 1934 to 1944, making him one of the longest-running cast members in the entire history of the series, second only to Spanky McFarland. Unlike several of his co-stars, Billy Thomas moved quietly and steadily through adult life. After the series ended, he worked for many years as a film laboratory technician. He had a family. He kept a relatively low profile and seemed to have made peace with what his childhood had been and what his adult life had become. In October 1980, Billy attended a Little Rascals reunion event. By accounts from those who were there, the evening was a warm one, and seeing old friends clearly meant a great deal to him. He received a standing ovation from the crowd. He was moved to tears. 3 months later, on October 10, 1980, Billy Buckwheat Thomas died of a heart attack. He was 49 years old. George Spanky McFarland, 1928 to 1993. George Robert McFarland was born on October 2, 1928, in Fort Worth, Texas. He had already appeared in Dallas-area advertising and children's clothing print campaigns before his Aunt Dottie saw an ad asking for photos of cute kids and sent one in to Hal Roach Studios. Spanky became the central figure of the entire franchise. He appeared in 95 shorts, more than any other cast member, from 1931 to 1942. He was the president of the He-Man Woman Haters Club, the boy who seemed to be in charge even when nothing was under control. His character's name came from his mother's habit of warning him not to grab things. Spanky mustn't touch. After leaving the series, George struggled to find a footing in Hollywood. The Spanky persona had become so famous that it was nearly impossible to be seen as anything else. He joined the United States Air Force. He took sales positions. He worked for a time as a management supervisor with Philco Ford. Later in life, he became a lecturer and a speaker, doing college tours where he talked about his days on the series and receiving the standing ovations that seemed to genuinely surprise and move him. He was an avid golfer and often appeared on the Pro-Am circuit. What George said publicly about his time on the show was always gracious. He never seemed bitter. In interviews, he talked about the work the way someone talks about a good childhood, which in a certain sense it was. "I have no regrets," he said in a 1977 interview. "Even though it was a job, we had a pretty good time making those comedies. As a kid, I had most everything I wanted, and we had a good life. When it was over, it was over." That last line, "when it was over, carried a kind of dignity that not all of his former co-stars managed to find. His final television appearance was a cameo as himself in an episode of Cheers in 1993. He died shortly after filming it, a heart attack, on June 30th, 1993. He was 64 years old. In 1994, he was awarded a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, a posthumous recognition for someone who had spent 95 films holding a whole generation of children's attention. It was the only royalty he ever received. The Rascals never got residuals, and they never received royalties from the decades of reruns or the merchandise that bore their faces. Billy Froggy Laughlin, 1932 to 1948. Billy Laughlin is the youngest of the core cast members to die, and his story is among the briefest and most painful. Billy was born on July 5th, 1932. He joined Our Gang in 1940, appearing in 40 shorts through the final years of the series. His signature was his voice, a deep, gravelly rasp that no one could quite explain in a child of 7 or 8. It sounded like a frog, and so he became Froggy. He also did uncanny impressions: Popeye, Jimmy Durante, W.C. Fields. The story goes that he was actually given a role in Our Gang specifically because he had perfected his Popeye impression so well that someone at the studio heard about it. When the series ended in 1944, Billy returned to high school in Duarte, California. He tried to get a few more acting jobs. When nothing materialized, he simply went back to being a student. On August 31st, 1948, Billy and a friend named John Wilbrand were riding a motorized scooter together through their neighborhood. Billy's parents had given him the scooter only 2 weeks before. A truck struck them from behind. Billy Laughlin was killed. He was 16 years old, the youngest of the Rascals to die, and one of the youngest anyone who loved the series would have to grieve. Scotty Beckett, 1929 to 1968. Scott Hastings Beckett was born on October 4, 1929 in Oakland, California. He was 3 years old when a casting director spotted him singing at Cedars of Lebanon Hospital, where his father was recovering from an illness. His father died shortly after. It was in those same hospital corridors that Scotty's path to the screen began. He appeared in Our Gang shorts from 1934 to 1935, playing Spanky McFarland's best friend, a kid with a crooked baseball cap worn sideways and an oversized sweater whose trademark look was borrowed from Jackie Coogan's appearance in the 1920 Charlie Chaplin film, The Kid. Scotty only made 15 Our Gang shorts, but his career beyond the series was genuinely impressive. He appeared opposite Spencer Tracy, Errol Flynn, Greta Garbo, and Norma Shearer. He played the young Al Jolson in The Jolson Story in 1946. He had a starring role in the television series Rocky Jones, Space Ranger in 1954, and then, over the course of the 1950s and into the 1960s, nearly everything fell apart. Multiple marriages, multiple arrests, drunk driving, bad checks, a concealed weapons charge in 1954 that cost him the Rocky Jones role, a desperate trip to Mexico with his second wife and young son that ended in arrest, 2 suicide attempts, alcohol and prescription drug dependency that consumed more and more of his life. In 1967, he was driving an ambulance, possibly, those who knew him speculated, to be near the medications he had become dependent on. In early May 1968, he suffered a beating whose circumstances were never fully explained. On May 8th, he checked himself into the Royal Palms Hotel, a Hollywood nursing home, to recover. He was found dead in his room on May 10th, 1968. A note and a bottle of pills were found beside him. The Los Angeles County coroner performed an autopsy, but returned a cause of death listed as undetermined. Scott Beckett was 38 years old. Alan Farina Hoskins, 1920 to 1980. Alan Clayton Hoskins was born on August 9, 1920, and holds a distinction that is often overlooked in the modern memory of the series. He appeared in more Our Gang shorts than anyone except Spanky McFarland, 105 films between 1922 and 1931. He was one of the original cast members, present from the very beginning, and one of the most versatile performers the series ever had. After leaving the series, Alan served in the United States Army during World War II. From 1955 until his death, he ran physical and mental rehabilitation workshops in California, working with people recovering from injuries and illness. He had, by nearly every account, a life that was meaningful and full. Alan Hoskins died on July 26, 1980, from cancer. He was 59 years old. A few more they left behind. The losses among the cast of Our Gang extend beyond the names that are most remembered. Richard Mickey Daniels was one of the original freckled-faced kids in the silent era of the series. He appeared in 75 shorts between 1922 and 1928. As an adult, he drifted away from show business entirely. His marriage ended. He was estranged from his children. On August 20th, 1970, Mickey Daniels was found dead in a hotel room in San Diego. He was 55 years old. The cause was cirrhosis of the liver. At the time he was found, there was no identification on him, and he was initially listed as a John Doe. Donald Haynes appeared in 36 shorts from 1930 to 1936. He was one of Alfalfa's best friends on screen, a cheerful, dark-haired boy who seemed to be having the time of his life in every scene. Donald Haynes died on August 2, 1946, of injuries he sustained during World War II. He was 22 years old. Darwood Waldo Kay appeared in 21 shorts between 1936 and 1941, playing the snooty, well-dressed rival to Alfalfa in Darla's Affections. After his acting career ended, Darwood became a minister. He lived a long and apparently quiet life until May 15, 2002, when he was struck and killed by a hit-and-run driver while walking on a sidewalk in Walla Walla, Washington. He was 72 years old. Kendall Breezy Brisbane McComas appeared in 35 shorts from 1932 to 1933. After leaving the series, he went into electrical engineering and spent many years working at the U.S. Naval Weapons Center in China Lake, California. He committed suicide in 1981, 2 weeks before his scheduled retirement. He was 64 years old. Part 2. What Their Lives Meant. There's something worth sitting with here, because looking at this group of children, who arrived on screen with such uncomplicated joy, such genuine looseness, such real laughter, What strikes you most is how unequipped the world around them was to take care of them once the cameras stopped. They were paid while they worked, though some were paid very little. None of them received residuals from the reruns, no royalties from the merchandise. When the television syndication deals turned those old films into a permanent presence in American living rooms throughout the 1950s and 1960s, making Hal Roach and MGM and their various successors very comfortable sums of money, the children whose faces were on every screen received nothing. Some of them handled that gracefully. George McFarland became a respected businessman and lecturer. Darla Hood built a real second career as a singer and voice performer. Billy Thomas quietly built a normal life in the film laboratory. Alan Hoskins spent decades helping others recover their health, but others carried the weight of early fame into adulthood and found it heavy in ways they had no tools to manage. Matthew Beard was 10 years old when the studio let him go and his paycheck stopped. Carl Switzer was 12. Scotty Beckett was not yet 6 when he was first put in front of a camera. These were children. Nobody prepared them for the other side. The pattern that runs through the harder stories is not simply poverty or bad luck or moral failure. It is the particular disorientation of a child who has known extraordinary love from an audience, who has heard applause, who has been treated as special and talented and irreplaceable, and who then, at an age when most children are still figuring out arithmetic, is quietly told that it's over. The studio needs someone younger. The audience has moved on. Come back if you want a tour of the lot. What do you do with that? At 12? At 10? Some of them found answers that worked. Others spent decades searching. There is something in the history of our gang that is deeply American. The belief that talent and charm could lift anyone, even a child from a poor family or a struggling neighborhood, into something bright and lasting. For a few years, for each of those kids, the belief was correct. The screens lit up, the audience laughed, and they were loved by people they would never meet. What came after was just life, and for some of them, life was harder than it had any right to be. Part 3. The Question of a Curse. Over the years, and especially after a 2002 documentary on the E! Network brought renewed attention to the subject, people began talking about the Little Rascals curse. The idea was that a statistically unusual number of the cast had died young or violently. It's worth being honest about this. The researchers at Snopes, who went through all 29 child actors who had 15 or more appearances in the series and compiled detailed records on each of them, concluded that there was no curse. When you look at the full list, not just the tragedies, but the many cast members who lived long, ordinary, and in some cases quite successful lives, the numbers don't support the idea of some supernatural pattern. Jackie Cooper, who appeared in 32 Our Gang shorts as a young boy, went on to become Perry White in the Superman films, had a decades-long career in television, and died peacefully in 2011 at the age of 88. Dorothy DeBorba, who played Echo in 32 installments, married, raised 2 children, worked as a clerk at UC Berkeley, and died in 2010 at 85. Tommy Bond, who played the bully Butch, Alfalfa's on-screen nemesis and off-screen best friend, worked for years in television production and died of heart disease in 2005 at 79. These are not the stories that get told at Halloween or dramatized in documentaries, but they are the true majority of the Our Gang story. What is real is this: the children who suffered the worst outcomes often shared something in common. They were among the most famous. They had left the series youngest, and they had the least support when the work stopped. The pattern is less about a curse than it is about what it means to give a child a taste of extraordinary love, and then, before they're old enough to understand what they've had, take it away. The kids who made up the Little Rascals gave generations of viewers something genuine and irreplaceable. The sight of children just being children, figuring out the world, making a mess of it, and laughing anyway. Their lives off screen were complicated in ways that screen time never hinted at. Some of them lived long and full lives. Others were gone much too soon, taken by accidents, by illness, by the slow damage of addiction, by violence, by the weight of lives that had come unmoored from the foundation that early fame had built. What stays in the end isn't the tragedies. It's the image of Alfalfa's cowlick, Stymie's derby, Spanky's grin, Darla's eyes. It's Froggy's impossible raspy voice, and Buckwheat's wide-open expression of permanent surprise. It's the sense that, for a few minutes at a time, on a small black and white screen in somebody's living room, you were watching something true, They deserved everything good. Most of them didn't get enough of it, but they gave plenty, and the best of what they left behind still holds up. If this video reminded you of someone you loved watching as a kid, or brought back memories of Saturday mornings and that theme music playing, please give it a like. It means more than you know. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now so you don't miss what's coming next. We'll see you in the next one.